11:30. Do you mind if I just bring up a slide? I know it's not gonna make its way onto the.
Yeah, because actually it's just launching this game, so that takes kind of Are the slides on USB or anything, or?
No, it's just on my my computer.
Oh, okay.
Hi, good to see you.
Yeah, the mouse might lag a bit, because I know the computer is definitely lagging.
That's perfect.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's not wrong.
Oh, we I just put in a tweet explaining why the camera angle is the way it is.
Is there a special code on YouTube?
There's gonna be a URL. So yeah, it's starting it there, so hopefully it's up. Oh yeah. Excellent, well, I'm working over it.
Yeah. Everything going well? Enjoying it?
Yeah.
Different.
Yeah.
Hello, people of Earth. Hello.
And where do you have the URL? Did you like tweet it or?
I've just repeated it a couple of times.
Because you probably find it somewhere or something. Because that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna test them there.
Retrieve my students who are opening it.
Well, yeah, I'm doing this library game. I was going around.
Yes, I did.
That's part of the language, but it's a separate building. I'm not sure the money over there. They charge every student.
Yes.
So you could to the video call or stuff like that. And so, and I've done here just in case volume that does come through starts some feedback or something, you can
Is this going to be a public
if he wants to see us, it's because it's in use that it might have an issue with video for him to see us.
Hi, Scott. Can you see us? Can you hear us?
So what we might need to do is change,
There's like the settings up there.
because you can try, I just know
Are you there? Can you hear me?
the camera might be an issue.
I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Can you
Is
hear
that
us?
microphone?
I don't know if any of you can hear me on the other end, but I can neither hear nor see anything.
No.
Click on that.
We'll have to change the,
They changed the mic with that.
we'll have to change the mic actually to the webcam. So change the mic to the webcam. It's because they can't use the same device for different programs. Yeah, so so that's okay. So you won't be able to see us, that's the issue. If you were to bring up the screen.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now, although there's a chatter in the background and I can't see anything.
Okay, so we only have, Scott, you can hear us. If you want to see us, you'll have to watch the stream on YouTube.
All right.
Okay? Thanks.
Because I think I only have one webcam. You can hook up another webcam and use that so you can see us, but I think I only have one.
I think we've got it working now, so
Okay.
that's
I'll be outside at least for 20 minutes, so I'm just going to watch the stream just to make sure it's working properly.
okay. Perfect.
I just need one of those mics.
Yeah. This is what I like, a full house. This is one of the nice things about being able to compel students to attend events. So, there are more chairs. There's some chairs up here in the front. If we need more chairs, we can steal them from the room next door.
Is there sorry. All right, now I'm echoing in the other audio.
This might work, Scott. It might not work. We'll give it a try and see how it goes.
Fair enough.
Okay. Sean, thank you.
Hi everyone, thank you for being here today. It's a real pleasure for me to be invited to moderate this session or moderate this discussion that we're going to be having around exploring big historical data, the historian's macroscope. And I'm pleased to introduce to you Sean Graham and Ian Milligan and impersonating Max Headroom, Scott Weingart. So just to give you a sense of what we're going to do today, we're going to have a somewhat brief conversation about the book, about some of the themes in the book, some of the ideas that come across in it. We're then, and during that discussion, I really encourage you all, if whether you're watching on the live stream or whether you're in the room, to tweet some questions that as they come up to #HMBook. Scott is going to be monitoring that stream and picking up questions as they come up. And of course, after I ask a few questions, I'm really going to be turning it over to you. If you have questions for Scott, Ian, or Sean, then they'll be pleased to answer your questions. After the discussion, there's going to be a short break where you can get coffee and some snacks from Starbucks, and then we'll come back. Of course, you can duck out after the discussion portion, but when we come back, then Sean and Ian are going to be taking us through some visualizations and network analysis, and that'll be more the hands-on portion of this session. But in the meantime, well, before that, let's just get into it. So today we're joined by Sean Graham, who's a professor of digital history here at Carleton. Sean's really interested in the pedagogy around digital humanities, around network modeling, as well as some topics ranging from landscape archaeology through to video games and historical video gaming. To his left is Ian Milligan, who is a professor of Canadian and digital history at the University of Waterloo. And Ian explores how web archives will challenge the historical profession in years to come. And on the screen is Scott Weingart, who is a historian of science and the DH specialist at Carnegie Mellon University. So without further ado, when we talk about big data, what does that mean for historians?
Well, it's big data. It's. I think in the book we come up with a definition that is a workable definition. in that big data is any data that's too big for you to work with as you would normally. So it's sort of a big enough data, biggish data, moderately pain in the butt data. It's this, when you talk to the data science folks or the data analytic folks, they have a definition of big data that depends entirely on storage capacity and how much information you're ingesting at any one time. So that definition of big data, of course, is a moving goalpost as well, because it's dependent on hardware, it's dependent on what's happening online. So the big data of 5 years ago isn't big enough anymore, so it becomes bigger data. So for historians, I think a definition of big data that's more relative to the ways that we are familiar and accustomed to working is a workable definition.
Yeah, I mean, my answer would be big data is a good way to sell a book. No. I mean, Sean's perfectly right. So in our book, we really do try to take that approach that big data is, more data than you know what to do with. More data on a scale, on a profound scale, than historians are used to dealing with. Whereas we're used to dealing with almost no information, like we carve together our narratives from tiny little traces of the past. And suddenly we've got, you're in an archive, and you have more information than you can imagine what to do with it. But that, is one of the tensions in our book and in the community is what is big data. We've got our definition. If you go to a big data conference, which is a lot of fun because they have more money than we do, they have the 4 V's: volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. About how the sheer scope of data, but just how quickly it can come in, and all these things can transform your business workflows. So,
Did you want to jump in on that, Scott?
I think we lost.
Sorry, this is a bit odd as I'm hearing myself about a second after I'm speaking. So yeah, I agree with what my co-authors have said. I think that we're really dealing with more than what historians have been used to. It's really, if a historian can't sit down and remember everything in 10,000 letters that she might want to be reading, then that might be what she considers big data.
Okay, thank you very much. For the benefit of the people who are watching on the live stream, where Scott can't be heard, he essentially reiterated that big data for historians is a moving goalpost, but it's often defined as data that is just unmanageable without the added assistance of a computer to work with that data.
Yeah. And there's a rhetorical angle to it as well, right? It's when the publishers came to us, they wanted a book on big data, and because big data was in the news, big data was was the buzzword on funding agencies, government people who don't otherwise use a computer very much for anything at all were saying, "Oh, big data." So it's a tactical term as much as anything as well.
And what does it allow you to do, to see in the sources? How does it change the way you do history?
Well, I've never been much of a historian.
He's got 10 years, we can say.
Surprise. But for me, I'm coming at this from a previous academic life as an archaeologist, right? Where data management issues are always really big because the practice of archaeology destroys what it studies. So you have to be very careful about your data in the first place. And then as I move into historical practice, the stuff that big data lets me do, or rather the tools of working with this stuff on my comparatively small data sets, it lets me see larger scale patterns in a way that to me is analogous to landscape archaeology, to how I would read a landscape, how I would look at different interventions in the landscape and pull a story out through that. So it's very much a scale and perspective kind of issue. But it also lets me do things that I'm interested in visualization, but for me, visualization can mean more than just simply graphs on a screen, right? It can involve sonification, about trying to listen to patterns in data, or it could be about, there's a landscape archaeologist named Stuart Eve who is trying to take all of those masses of big archaeological data and return it to the landscape through what he calls embodied GIS. So he actually uses all of these tools to pull that digital layer that overlays everything and make it physical and discernible again. So it's a literal embodiment, I think, for me, which probably doesn't mean much.
No, my own take on how big data changes what I do is sort of, threefold. Is one, it really, and this is just more reflective, but it lets me as a historian, it lets all of the people in the room, from undergraduates to other faculty, access sources they could never do before. And that sounds really trite, but it's, an example would be, I was writing an article on childhood, what it was like for kids in the 1990s, government forces regulating them and stuff. And the ability for me to sit at my computer in Waterloo, Ontario, sounds like a hokey thing in the future. But I'm sitting at this computer in Waterloo, Ontario, it's kind of boring to see. But suddenly, I can actually tangentially go look at what was British legislation like in the 1990s. And it's not like I'm becoming an expert of Britain, still Canadian history, but it lets me actually go and say, look at British legislation, look at their newspapers really briefly, what were they saying about this, and provide a global texture to an article that if I was writing this in 1985, grabbing these sources, I would have had to fly to London, and I wouldn't have flown to London. So it makes our work bigger. As we'll talk about maybe a bit later, it lets me find the stories of everyday people. All of you are leaving sources on a scale, like in the 1990s, I had a Geocities page.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, or like in 1994, I had a Warhammer 40,000 Usenet post. And these are things that I can find now that are in the historical record. And I can guarantee you, as someone who wrote a book on Canada's 1960s, kids in the 1960s weren't leaving sources, really. Like it was detective work. And now suddenly I've got tens of thousands of kids who are writing really embarrassing things, which puts a whole ethical qualm in mind. So it's reshaped everything, and technology is reshaping what we do. Like an example we use in the book, and I've used elsewhere, is as newspapers say are digitized. So like Globe and Mail gets digitized in 2001, 2002. We all begin to cite Globe and Mail more. We all begin to cite the Ottawa Citizen less. Globe and Mail is developed using legal era optical character recognition. It's where it takes like the A, turns it into an A that your computer can read in the text file. Does it really, really poorly because it's designed to be working on legal documents, not on 19th century microfilmed photographs, basically. And so all of these things, big data is changing the way we do history, and some of that's good, but some of it also requires us to be a lot more self-reflective and think about how technology, why is something number one on the Google result list rather than 10,000? Or like everybody's research assistant is Google now, or Google Books. We all use Google Books to find references, so you don't go to the library. I do that. And all of that is fundamentally reshaping how we do it. Every minute of our lives.
And we should be honest when we cite the digital version. We'll stop pretending that we actually looked at
The actual source.
the actual source, because we misrepresent what we do.
Well, you mentioned archiving, the traces that we're leaving in increasing quantities now, and I kind of want to unpack that while we're on the topic. You've mentioned elsewhere that it becomes a matter of archiving the present, and that's fairly. It's similar to what historians have done in the past in terms of thinking about the curation of sources, but the scale has changed significantly. As you mentioned, that kids are leaving sources now, and you've done quite a bit of work on Geocities and thinking about archiving the 90s again. And I was wondering if you could share a bit about that work with us.
Sure. I'll try not to talk for 55 minutes on that question. But basically, I think so Geocities, in a really short nutshell, begins in 1994. It's an online publishing platform. So the web's really, really new to people, and just let me check. So the web is very new to people, and users can sign up. They get on the web, they can sign up. About 1 megabyte is sort of the free capacity. It's a joke by our standards. But the argument is it lets people, along with a few other competitors, for the first time, everyday people can gain access to a publishing platform that leaves behind a historical record. And so in my view, that encapsulates, there's an article by Roy Rosenweg, who was a late American historian, who really theoretically traced out a few years ago what it would mean to go from an idea of scarcity, we want more information about the past but it doesn't exist, to abundance, where we have too much information about the past and we don't know what to do. And Geocities, I think, lets us test this, because the example I use, it really bugs early modernists, is if we take the Old Bailey online, which some of you probably in Sean's class have seen the Old Bailey online, perhaps it's not, but it's a digitized record of criminal cases in central London, 1674 to 1913. If you do history in that period, in England, you use the Old Bailey online because it really is the only record, in many cases, of what it was like to be an everyday person. Because everyday people don't leave behind traces. Rich people leave behind traces. Everyday people were mining in criminal records and that sort of thing. So I say 1674 to 1913, we have 197,000 records from the Old Bailey online, of the Old Bailey. Just between 1994 and 2009, Geocities, we have 38 million documents and 7 million users. And that sits on my hard drive. And we have to figure out how to use that hard drive. We have to figure out if I should be looking at it. We have to figure out the ethics of how that works. My search engine in 2015 is better than a search engine in 2000. I'm finding sources that you couldn't have found if you were on the live web at that time. But to me, that is just one amplet. That's a small little sliver of the web. That's changing everything. And we need to start thinking about this now, because my last point on this long answer is the 90s is history. The 90s really is history. If we look at, I did 1960s for my first book. People started writing about 1968 as a historical event by 1986. And by 1995, 1996, you could do your PhD on the 60s. 30 years after event, we write our histories. We're going to be 30 years from the birth of the web, literally within the next 4 or 5 years, depending on how you date the birth of the web. So.
Oh, thanks for that. I have a few more questions by myself, but I was
If you don't mind, I'd like to jump on real fast.
Yeah, go for it.
Great. So this is actually launching off of what Ian was talking about, but also the question before of how big data is changing historical practice for us personally. For me, if you have something like the Old Bailey, if you have something like a very large data set of whatever historical period you're interested in, the interesting thing here is how it changes the nature of how we approach evidence. In the past, for historians, when you're looking to form a historical hypothesis, when you're looking to explore a topic, you're trying to look for evidence in the archives, and the evidence process, the evidence finding process is usually so painful and difficult and long that finding at least evidence is to get the ball rolling, and enough to really be suggestive of certain trends in history. When we have this giant mass of data, we have to realize that you can usually find anything that you want to look for. That is, if you have a hypothesis about something that's happened, there's probably some document somewhere in all of everything that's been digitized that would actually help support whatever thesis you have, no matter what it is. So now that we have such a big data set, it's beholden on us not to rely on what's easy to find, but to actually look for trends in the data that we have. So when evidence is no longer, at least a single piece of evidence is no longer sufficient to be supportive of a historical hypothesis when you have an entire swath of data that may be suggesting something otherwise. So you really have to look at the large-scale trend historical documents that you have to be able to make a stronger historical claim.
Oh, thanks for that. For the benefit of the people who are watching on the live stream who can't hear Scott, Scott was pointing out that when you have a very large data set, it changes the way that we approach our sources. So traditional historical research located in the archive could be described as something of a painful process where you have to sift through a lot of material to finally find something that is indicative of the trends that are relative to the period. And when you contrast that process with the giant data set that we now have available on the web, it really changes the way that we approach the sources and the way that we approach them critically, going beyond data mining for things that confirm the hypothesis that you're working with, to thinking to looking at the arc of data more broadly and looking at what the actual trends are in the data.
Exactly.
Thanks for that, Scott. Yeah, so I'm just going to turn it over to the audience if there are any questions that you have that you're dying to ask Sean, Ian, or Scott.
So it's more of a methodological question.
Sure.
When you were writing all of this, obviously it was difficult given all three of you are at very different institutions. Did you at any point find a student put forward any ideas that made you suddenly question something you'd written, or made you suddenly feel like you had to go in a different direction with something, and then you had to bring that up with the group?
Students.
Sure, I mean, I can,
Did you road test on any students?
I
No,
did.
I know I did.
yeah, no, I test on students and, both graduate students and undergraduate students, both played. So one of my graduate students did quite a bit of work. We had him go through and play test a bunch of stuff. He's acknowledged prominently in it. And he certainly inspired us to do some changes, especially around the regular expressions. Yeah, it's hard to say because we really did, for the first writing, it's a 7-chapter book, with really 6 chapters in my mind. And we really did split up the writing of the first draft along those lines. So I can't remember a moment when I took stuff to you and said, we have to change what we did because of the student. But I know, especially some of the computer science students that I work with, their imprint is in there casually just from my interaction with them, the way that they think about technology versus the way that as a human as I think about technology.
Well, one of the, as we were writing this, I was teaching a class on data mining and visualization for third-year history students. And a lot of the material that we were generating, I would then take into the classroom and we would use it. And there were lots of hiccups. There were lots of road bumps. And what was really valuable about that, on the computer in my office, computer in Ian's office or in Scott's office are big souped up machines with all sorts of customizations and gadgets and gizmos. But the computer that turns up in a classroom is the $300 computer from Best Buy. And so part of the problem is, doing something on a Mac, you would do it one way. Doing something on a Windows machine, you would do it another way. And in that class, I remember there was even 1 or 2 students who were using Linux. And so it becomes a trilingual kind of conversation, trying to make sure that what works on one machine works on another machine. And when it doesn't work, that's quite interesting because that sometimes surfaces problems in the way that the machines or the operating systems imagine the world works in the first place. And so writing a piece meant for somebody reading whom I will never meet and I will never speak to, and writing it in such a way that they can sit down and say, right, okay, I understand how this is supposed to work on my particular machine. Writing tutorials, I think, and that's the way how we first met, in fact, we sat down to write a tutorial for the programming historian. They say if you want to learn something, go ahead and teach it. Well, I think in digital work, if you want to learn something really, really well, write a tutorial for your mom and dad, for your brother, for the people in your class. And I think that does an awful lot for, if there's any value in the book at all, I think a lot of it comes out of those opportunities we had to road test with students. And some of them are here right now, and I apologize deeply. Sorry, Scott.
Yeah, it's also worth pointing out all of the students who weren't in our courses or our institutions who were helping out. For example, I believe it was Dr. Seligman at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, who had students reading over our lessons in her history class and commenting on our open draft of the Macroscope. And their comments wound up being incredibly helpful for helping us determine what was useful, what was not useful, what was difficult to understand, and ultimately changing the final version of the book. So I think part of the open process of writing this really helped us to get feedback from students who we never would have interacted with otherwise.
Just to reiterate what Scott said, he pointed out that Dr. Seligman at the University of Wisconsin had used the open draft of the Macroscope to obtain feedback from her students, and that feedback was really useful in formulating the final version of this book. And that really brings up an important point, which is one of the unique features of this book, in that it was written in a very different way. It wasn't a closed or traditional peer review process, and I was wondering if you might want to talk a bit about that.
Sure. It was a different experience, absolutely. As I recall, our initial proposal, so the press contacted us and we talked it over and we said to the press, you know, we would really like to do this out in the open. Because we had had some experience with open peer review in different venues, including Writing History in the Digital Age, which used Comment Press, which is a plugin for the WordPress blogging platform that allows anybody to leave comments at the level of the individual paragraphs. And so we said to the press that we would really like to do this out in the open. And they actually sent our proposal by five peer reviewers just for the proposal. And then we started writing it in public. So we put this blog platform up, we customized it to allow people to leave comments, and then we started writing. Sort of a performance art fail in public, warts and all, and it was fantastic. Most of the time, I don't think we ever really caught any, I mean, there was spam occasionally, you know, Viagra, I can set you up, but we didn't have any sort of real negative experience, I think, in that regard.
Yeah, I was thinking about Sean cheated who gave us some of your ideas before, so I had a chance to reflect on this more. And it was the idea of writing. So we wrote it in public. The first draft of the book, which you can still find, it's still online. And actually, we're slowly putting up sections of the book that the pre-copy editing layout, with the preprint kind of thing, but post-peer review.
And that's at the macroscope.org.
Yeah, because there was also peer review before manuscript. And I guess thinking like that, writing in public did two things for me. One, it made me more cautious in some ways. Maybe more cautious because you're writing non-linearly, which is tough in a historical profession where you're used to long-form linear scholarship. And you just almost constantly had that feeling that you get before you submit a paper to a professor, before you submit a paper to a peer reviewer, an editor, or something along those ways, that idea that people will read this in a way that my drafts are normally not read by any but my most trusted friends and colleagues. So maybe we're cautious around that. Maybe we're cautious, I'm worried sometimes, like I do with my blog more generally, if I was going to let page stats affect my writing. I'm always wondering, if something resonates online, a bunch of people read it, am I going to flush that out and pay attention to less other parts of the book? And in long-form scholarship, that's a bit dangerous, I think. But on the second flip side, so maybe more cautious, and there was this element of stress to it, like most good things to do. But secondly, it also made me more confident because I knew that it had lots of eyes. Like when Amanda Seligman brought her class, and we had 30 people. Their assignment for the week was to go through our book. And that gives you the confidence of hopefully they're going to catch stuff and they're going to point things out. And people outside of our area of expertise and the area of expertise of peer reviewers can catch little minor things, like a off-the-cuff thing we might have said about early modern Britain. An early modern British historian read it and flagged a few things that we might want to read up on. So it was a mixture of cautiousness, but also at the end of the day, I feel a lot happier with the process because I know that it went through. I know that hundreds of people at least glanced at it, and a not minority, a few dozen, really engaged with it and left lots of comments and interacting with focus.
So we had like 30 peer reviewers.
Yeah.
That's a lot of
Did you want to talk about your experience?
Sure, yeah, I'm actually going to flip that around a little bit and say, my first experience producing a printed book, and if I were to start academia over again, I don't think that a printed book is the way that I would go. I'm actually more terrified that the final version of the draft that we wound up sending to the press that's now printed has, I think, already sold out of paperback copies on Amazon. I'm terrified that there's a mistake in there, that we can't go in and edit all of the tiny mistakes that people find in the book. The great thing about doing this online and having it interactive and continuously updating is that we're human. If we miss something, somebody can correct it, we can change it. The idea that there needs to be this solid finish in academia is very much related to the printed culture we come from, not the digital culture we live in. So I'm more scared of the print copy than of the digital copy.
Thanks for that. And so Scott was just flipping around the question about publishing online, saying that if he were to do it again, he might not actually go towards the physical printed mode of publishing, and in that it's terrifying that he can't necessarily go back and fix a mistake should somebody come across a mistake in a book, and it's and that form of publishing is more representative of the print culture that we come from, rather than the digital culture that we now live in. And we have a question from the audience.
Well, I just wanted to pause for a sec to say congratulations and thank you. I know I got here late, but I want to emphasize that, but then I want to raise a question. So my congratulations and thank you. I really appreciate both the way in which you did it and the ambition of it. And so the process and product aspects of this, I think are just terrific. I should also mention, the fact that it's here at Carleton. Dale Muse just came in, and you may know that this department was early in the game, and Dale was the man at that time. And so it's, and even though I'm at another university, I think it's great. And Dominique Marshall, now in the leadership of CHA, so congratulations. I think it's just terrific. Thank you, because now that I'm back teaching, along with Jennifer Bunnell and myself, Potin's book, it gives us some Canadian voices for really helping in great ways, and we're indebted to that. But I want to get you to talk a bit more about what I see. I'm absolutely convinced that this kind of work is the most exciting aspect of what's going on campus, I would say, along with maybe some things in the cognitive sciences, neuroscience, and maybe with genetics. But certainly, and it's related, so it's in that mix. But I hear constantly, and I am struck by, returning after 8 years, how things look a lot more like they did in the 1990s than I might have expected in terms of our curriculum, in terms of lots that's going on campus. And what I hear is that it is not a good idea for scholars like you three to write in public, to not be able to show the stamp of approval of peer review. And I love the way you talked about in your volume the discussion with the press about what writing in public would be like. And so the fact that you got it done in a very timely fashion, which I love. Our world is not known for that. The fact, and often people say, oh, if I engage others, it's going to take me the rest of my life, and so on. So it seems to me that, I think it's an amazingly important scholarly contribution. I can understand in terms of those traditional boxes, it's going to get into a textbook, some second class thing sometimes, right? So can you talk about how your ways of working, your intellectual engagement is not fitting well with some of the policies and practices and so on that you see around you? I am immensely proud that you've been very successful getting funding. I know that some parts of the world are embracing what I would consider a 21st century paradigm. But I can also tell you that this is not moving as quickly as I think it should. And I've been told there are real reasons for this. So can you reflect a little bit about the downside of this at some level in terms of the fact that I think not everyone is going to applaud either the ways in which you've undertaken this, they may applaud it for you, but not for them, or your ambition in terms of your intellectual contribution.
Can I start with this?
Please do.
Great. So there's a lot that goes into the academic world that we live in. Who gets tenure, who gets promotion, who gets hired, and these are based on a complex system of what's actually good scholarship, how we've always been doing things, what the institutional inertia is, and a lot of the suggestions by groups like AHA on what to do in your professional career are based less on good scholarship than they're based on what the world just is like right now. And you're maybe less likely to get a book deal if you don't embargo your dissertation. So part of this is we have to conform to these standards because that's how the whole world is already looking at things. The three of us are coming from a position of privilege. We are white men in a world that tends to credit white men for things. And so we have the ability to be a little bit more risky than some other people might be, whether they be graduate students, whether they be women, whether they be minorities, who already have the world stacked against them when it comes to academic barriers like this. Because it's a little bit easier for us to take these more extreme steps, and there are many other people in our position who are already doing this as well. I feel that it's incumbent on us to take these steps, to be a little bit more experimental, so that we can actually change the institutional structures that we have, because it's not going to change if everybody keeps saying, oh, the next generation has to worry about it. This generation, we have to worry about what everybody else is already doing about it. So the people who are in more privileged positions, especially like tenured faculty, we need to be going out and taking these risks and experimenting with the scholarly form, or it's never going to change, like you're saying. It looks a lot like the 90s, and we need to make sure that the inertia of academia doesn't keep pulling us back towards.
So just to summarize, that Scott was saying that that it's essentially incumbent on people who are writing from a position of privilege. So various forms of privilege. The fact that all three authors are white men. They're in a position of tenure that allows them a certain amount of freedom to take risks with their projects, and so it's incumbent on them to take those risks if they want to actually change the academy and move it from this 90s style of publishing and working into the 21st century.
My own take on this is it's two things. That Scott, I think, is completely correct. I'm not tenured on my tenure track, but I felt that I feel I'm free to do this because I have a book, and I have my first peer-reviewed monograph book, and that's what my department cares about. My department wants a book. If you don't have a book, I think it would be a battle. If you do have a book, you have to do work. But that's a safety net for me. Because we're relatively transparent about it, I published my dissertation book that gave me the freedom to engage. But within history, like we do a big annual review process, I'm thinking about tenure this summer, I'm gonna go up. My blog won't be a central part of my tenure promotion. So I don't list individual blog posts on my CV, and that rubs some people the wrong way. I actually often don't talk about my blog in the Department of History context. And so history is behind the scenes, but as soon as I get outside of that, so when I got peer reviews on a grant, one of the reasons they wanted to fund me was Ian Milligan's blog is the go-to resource for web archiving. And it is. And when I go to conferences, so I get invitations to speak because of my blog. People know my work outside in library archives. They wouldn't know my traditional scholarship. And so it's funny that I wear two hats. In the history department, it's all about the peer-reviewed articles, the 30-page manuscripts, the peer-reviewed book, everything fitting that box. And as soon as I'm out at conferences or I'm in the digital humanities world, or especially hanging out with librarians and archivists who are my new community for a lot of my work, they don't care about any of that. They're not going to read an article I wrote in the Canadian Historical Review, but they are going to read my blog post. And so it's professional opportunities coming from it that actually do a positive feedback loop to let me get the opportunities to generate peer-reviewed scholarship. It's sort of a
Double life.
yeah, but a double life that the opportunities that come, I think, from writing in public and blogging especially, feed into giving me the opportunities to contribute to a peer-reviewed collection or give a keynote or something like that. So, but in history, it's frustrating because we're not there yet. We really are. I mean, the comment I'll have is this year's been good for me on grants. And someone in my department in a position of power said, because we don't really celebrate grants, we celebrate books. And one of the comments in our department was, so what, you got these grants. We'll celebrate when you publish the book. And I said, that shows you actually have no, hopefully not watching, that shows you have actually no clue what I'm doing. This is not a grant to write a book. This is a grant to develop infrastructure and research mechanisms for web archives. But they still just say, so you got the book, so you can fly to the archive, and we'll celebrate in 4 years when you publish the monograph. But that will change. That will change as more junior. I don't know, it has to change the ethics.
In my particular case, I am tenured, and I'm every day grateful that Carleton threw me a bone back in 2010, because in 2002, when I graduated with my PhD, there's not much call for a stamped brick expert in the construction trade of Rome from the 1st to 3rd centuries in Eastern Canada. You just can't beat with that, and it's really hard. But one of the things that, so between 2002 and 2010, that's a lot of years to try and stitch something together. And I was able to do it, and I was lucky, supporting my family and so on. It was never about finding the one job and living in it all the time. It was always, you're going to be doing lots of different things. And I survived, things happen. And during that period, I started blogging. And it was through blogging that I made some kind of connection with my former scholarly self. And then in 2010, I woke up one morning and discovered that this turned me into a digital humanist. And there was this job advertisement for a digital humanities guy in the history department. And sure, I can do that. And it was wonderful because nobody really knew what that was supposed to be. And so I've always figured my role here in the department as a Roman archaeologist. It's a hard one to juggle, but it's always been to figure out what this digital stuff actually means. So my entire shtick has always been about failing in public, failing gloriously, and making it safe for my students to do that as well, to try things, to not be locked in the idea that historical scholarship equals a paper. The first class I had at Carleton, we blitzed Wikipedia one afternoon, and it was a lot of fun. We learned an awful lot about how Wikipedia works in terms of historical writing, but all of my history majors were sick that day. And they had already internalized in their first year at university that being a history student, being a historian, meant you will write a paper and it will look like this, and heaven help you if it's not in MLA format or Chicago, whatever. See? Archaeologists. If you can't put it in the main text, Why are you writing it in a footnote? I'm not interested in your arguments in footnotes, historians. Anyway, so my point is, you know, I did put individual blog posts on my tenure portfolio, and I had to tell the story in that portfolio about why this mattered, why this constituted scholarship, and what it is that I was trying to do. Scott's point about us, our privileged position as three white guys working on the internet, the broader ecosystem that we've created in the digital world really makes people who don't look like us, really punishes people. And so we've got to take the risk. I mean, what the hell is a university for if we're not taking risks? I mean, so I'll fail in public and I'll do it with a smile, and if it flops terribly, then so be it. And I can say that now, but it's important to note I was saying this in 2010 as well, before this happened, because I lived in the academic wilderness before. It's not that bad of a place. Gosh darn it. I didn't quite know how to close that thought up, so I'll go for a cheap laugh instead.
We have another question from Dominique.
So I was the chair of the department when Sean got his tenure. So it's moving slowly, but it's moving. So Sean and I had to sit down and think about a CV because the template we have doesn't fit Sean's experience. But we did do some work towards presenting a CV which was not subservient to the old shape, but was using the spirit of the old shape, with what he was doing. And we used for that the American Historical Association guideline on how to integrate digital humanities in presenting your scholarship. And they've done a lot of work to try to say, okay, here's what it used to look like, here is how we can convince the institutions that the same kind of work is done otherwise, right? So, and then when we wrote our letter to support his tenure, we had to rethink the letter, and it started. You don't know that, but it started. It's confidential. But that part is not. We started with a definition of what is digital history because we knew that the 35 people in the room wouldn't know what that was, or most of them wouldn't. And one of the places where we really pushed hard is how, and those of you who do that for your research, do that for your teaching. I don't know if it's bound to be together, but you really do it twice. It's an engagement twice. So how digital humanities made for very good teaching, and how reflexive was Sean's work. Like you all write about teaching, right? So very few of us non-digital historians write about teaching. You all do. And so that's like 1/3 of the letter, right? Why these people are good teachers. So I'm saying it is changing. It's always gonna be slower. And I come from the same conference where Chad was, where people dream about digital and interdisciplinary and global. And I'm in my departmental chair, thinking that God is hard every time I talk global. I fall under all the heavy politics of India and China, right? Every time I think digital, there's no plug here. The internet connection is bad, right? And every time I talk interdisciplinary, I meet the jealousies of the other chairs because our president thinks budget department and hiring department. So it's hard, so it's slower. But you need a few optimists there, and things are changing, right?
And chairs like you that are willing to do that.
Absolutely.
That's what I was wondering, is this a Carleton thing, or is this because Sean was hired as a digital humanist? Because that's
what I said on the job advert.
That's fantastic.
No, it's you push, and then sometimes the battles that you think you're going to have don't manifest at all. And it's a real nice surprise when that happens. And it was, Dominique worked very hard for me to get that through.
The position came really because of public history. They were able to say, it's what Chad said on the meaning of history for the wider world. So then we have a good program of public history. Within that, they were able to say, well, if we want to do that nicely, we really need a digital historian.
And of course, there's also this emergence of the positions such as digital humanities specialists that have this dual role that is linked to pedagogy and pedagogical support, but also working with the university's library and other resource departments on the campus to bring it all together. Is there another question from the audience?
I mean, the library support when I first turned up was amazing. Like, that was one of the first things I did, was actually map out all of the different projects and people around campus who were working on things digital, and seeing how that landscape actually looked like in the library, and in particular the library archives was the pivot point for this entire institution and how it was going. So in terms of doing this kind of work, the libraries are absolutely critical pieces in this puzzle.
Well, I think we're just about out of time. If there's somebody that has a question that they're burning to ask, please feel free to do so now. Otherwise, I just want to extend my congratulations to you for this great book. I mean, when I was considering going back to do my PhD myself, I'd come across the Macroscope website as well, and seeing this work in public and seeing this ongoing process of feedback, and to see historians and archaeologists and humanists working with a whole new set of sources in an entirely new way that seems so much more connected to the world that we live in today was really inspiring, and it ultimately got me to come back and do my PhD. So to see the book out now is just great. I'm really happy for the three of you. And if you're interested in picking up the book, you can there's information on where to buy it on themacroscope.org. And for the benefit of the people who are in the room today, there's a number of order forms at the back of the room. So I encourage you to fill one out, and hopefully everyone in the room will buy a book before they leave. But yeah, thanks again for this, and thanks for answering our questions.
Thank you very much for hosting.
And yeah, we'll have a little bit of a break, and then we'll reconvene after. Those of you who want to stay for an interactive session on network analysis and visualization, then please feel free to come back. Thanks.
There is coffee and snacks out in the hallway.
Yeah, well, I think that's one. Within the first no kidding, it was go. And so that's I'm just going to turn all that on the screen.
Anyway,
So I took steps to go in and work I started talking to this guy who was really interested.
Trying to get,
And I got really
I'm trying to turn off the stream.
Yes, what
So we have to be quiet, my niece is gonna run out.
Congratulations,
Thank you very much.
well done. So, show what you did, put this into the email.
Yeah.